Your garden is covered in aphids again. You sprayed neem oil 3 times this month. You bought the little yellow sticky traps. You even tried the garlic and dish soap spray your neighbor swore by. And somehow, by the time you check your plants next week, the infestation is back like nothing happened. Here's the problem nobody tells you. Most pest sprays, even the natural ones, only kill the bugs that are already there. They do nothing to stop the next wave from showing up. It's like mopping up water from a leaking pipe instead of fixing the pipe. You're managing a symptom, not the source. There's a completely different approach, and it doesn't involve spraying anything at all. Certain perennial plants, once established, create conditions that make your garden genuinely less attractive to pests, year after year, without you lifting a finger each spring. Some of them work through scent. Some work through taste. And one of them on this list doesn't repel a single bug directly. Instead, it does something almost sneaky. It sends out a dinner invitation to an army of tiny predators that do the pest control for you, for free, while you're inside drinking coffee. We'll get to that one, and it might change how you think about your whole garden layout. Today we're going through 8 perennials that, once planted, keep working season after season. No repurchasing annuals every spring. No weekly spray schedule. Just smart plant placement doing quiet, consistent work in the background. If that sounds useful, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one. If that's the kind of gardening advice you've been looking for, subscribe now. Now, let us start with the plant most people already have staring at them in their kitchen. Number 1. Garlic chives. Picture this. Your roses are getting hit by aphids every single June, right on schedule, like the bugs have it marked on a calendar. You assume it's just bad luck, or maybe your soil, or maybe you're watering wrong. Most gardeners never consider that the plants sitting right next to the roses might be part of the problem, simply because there's nothing actively defending that space. Here's where a lot of people go wrong with companion planting. They think any strong-smelling plant will scare off any bug, as if pests are one big group with the same preferences. They're not. Different insects rely on very specific chemical cues to find their host plants, and that specificity is exactly what we can use against them. Garlic chives, Allium tuberosum, release sulfur compounds through their leaves, the same family of chemicals that gives onions and garlic their bite. Aphids and several other soft-bodied pests locate host plants partly by smell, homing in on the particular chemical signature of a rosebush or a pepper plant. When garlic chives are planted nearby, that signature gets muddied. The pest sensors, tuned to find one specific scent, get confused by the sulfur compounds drifting through the air. Some research on intercropping with alliums has shown measurable reductions in aphid landing rates, though results vary by pest species and garden conditions. So think of this as tilting the odds in your favor rather than a guarantee. Here's the practical part. Plant garlic chives in clusters around the base of aphid-prone plants like roses, tomatoes, and peppers, rather than scattering single plants far apart. A ring of 6 or 8 plants does more work than one lonely chive stuck in a corner. They handle full sun best, tolerate partial shade, and thrive in USDA zones 4 through 9. Put them in during spring after your last frost, and they'll establish quickly. There's a bonus most people overlook entirely. Garlic chives are edible, with a mild garlicky flavor perfect for stir-fries and salads, and their white star-shaped flowers in late summer draw in bees and hoverflies by the dozens. Those hoverflies matter more than you'd think, because their larvae eat aphids too. One word of caution though, let the flowers go to seed, and you may find chive seedlings popping up everywhere next spring, so deadhead if you want to keep them contained. One more thing worth knowing before we move on. Garlic chives are perennial in the truest sense, meaning the clump you plant this spring will come back thicker every year without replanting. Divide established clumps every 3 or 4 years in early spring, right as new growth emerges, and you'll end up with free plants to expand your defensive ring around other vulnerable crops. It's one of the few pest control strategies that actually gets cheaper over time instead of more expensive. Garlic chives handle the low-level, everyday soft-bodied pests. But what about the pests with wings? The ones that show up in a single afternoon and strip a plant bare before you even notice. Number 2, lavender. Everyone assumes lavender is a bug repellent because, well, it smells so strongly of, well, lavender. It's intense. Surely nothing wants to be near that. But here's the twist. Lavender isn't a universal pest shield. It's closer to a specialist tool, and using it in the wrong spot means you're not actually getting the protection you think you're getting. The compounds responsible for lavender's fragrance, mainly linalool and camphor, are genuinely disruptive to specific insects, particularly moths. Cabbage moths, clothes moths, and several other moth species navigate using scent trails and are known to avoid areas with high concentrations of these compounds. That's useful information, because moth larvae, caterpillars, are some of the most destructive vegetable garden pests around. Meanwhile, don't expect lavender to do much against aphids or spider mites. Different chemistry, different targets. So the practical move is to plant lavender specifically along the border of brassica beds, cabbage, broccoli, kale, where cabbage moths lay their eggs. A hedge of lavender doesn't stop every moth, but it does reduce how many find your plants in the first place, especially when combined with other tactics like row covers during peak egg-laying season in early summer. Lavender wants full sun and, critically, sharp drainage. It actually performs worse in rich, moist soil than in poor, rocky soil, which makes it one of the lowest maintenance perennials you can grow once it's settled in. It handles zones 5 through 9 well, and English lavender varieties tolerate colder winters better than French types if you're in a harsher climate. The overlooked benefit here is pollinator traffic. Lavender is one of the most bee-attractive plants you can grow, and more bees in your garden means better pollination rates for everything from squash to strawberries. You're not just deterring bad insects, you're actively recruiting good ones at the same time. Timing matters more than people expect with lavender. Prune it right after the main summer bloom fades, cutting back about a third of the plant, and you'll encourage a bushier, more fragrant shape the following year, instead of the woody, sparse growth that untended lavender tends to develop after a few seasons. Skip fall pruning entirely, though, since cutting into old wood right before winter often kills the plant outright in colder zones. Quick question for you. Which pest gives you the most trouble in your own garden right now? Drop it in the comments, because a few of the plants coming up might be exactly what you need. Now, lavender and garlic chives both work by masking scent or disrupting navigation, but there's a completely different mechanism at play with our next plant, one with a name that might already sound familiar if you own a cat. Number 3. Catmint. Catmint, nepeta, has a reputation problem. Most people know it as that plant that makes cats roll around like idiots and assume its only garden function is entertainment. That's underselling it badly. The active compound in catmint, nepetalactone, is the same one responsible for the feline reaction, but it also happens to be genuinely unpleasant to a surprising range of garden pests. Squash bugs, aphids, and several beetle species have shown avoidance behavior around nepetalactone in various studies, and it's even been researched as a natural mosquito repellent, in some lab tests outperforming DEET on a per-molecule basis, though real-world garden results are more modest and inconsistent than that headline suggests. The honest answer is that catmint works better as one layer of defense than as a standalone solution. Here's how to actually use it. Plant catmint as a border around vegetable beds, especially near squash, zucchini, and cucumbers, which squash bugs target aggressively. The scent barrier isn't perfect, but combined with regular monitoring for egg clusters on leaf undersides, it meaningfully cuts down on how many squash bugs establish themselves before you catch the problem. Catmint tolerates full sun to partial shade and isn't fussy about soil, which is rare for a plant this useful. It's hardy in zones 3 through 8 and spreads via rhizomes, so give it room, or expect to divide it every couple of years to keep it in bounds. After the first big bloom flush, shear it back by about a third, and you'll get a second round of flowers within a few weeks. The overlooked advantage with catmint is its sheer resilience. It shrugs off drought, doesn't need fertilizing, and blooms for months, which means a longer window of nectar for bees and beneficial predatory wasps. That long bloom period matters more than it sounds like it should, and we're about to get into exactly why. Before we go further, if this is useful to you, take 2 seconds to hit subscribe. We've still got the plant I mentioned at the start, the one that doesn't repel pests at all, but recruits an entire predator army instead, and it's coming up right now. Number 4. Yarrow. Remember that surprising revelation from the intro? Here it is. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, doesn't chase pests away with scent. It does something almost the opposite. It invites more insects into your garden, and that's exactly why it works. Most companion planting advice focuses entirely on repellent plants, things that push pests away through smell or taste. But that approach misses half the equation. Pest populations don't just decline because pests leave. They decline because predators arrive and eat them. Ladybugs, lacewings, parasitic wasps, and hoverflies are voracious pest hunters. But many of these beneficial insects need something specific to survive between meals: nectar and pollen from small, easily accessible flowers. This is where yarrow earns its keep. Its flowers grow in flat clusters called umbels, made up of dozens of tiny individual blooms. That structure is perfect for short-mouthed beneficial insects that can't reach into deep tubular flowers. A single yarrow plant can host dozens of predatory and parasitic species feeding on nectar while they wait for prey to show up nearby. Entomologists sometimes call this kind of plant an insectary plant, essentially a recruitment station for your garden's natural pest control force. Ladybug larvae alone can eat dozens of aphids a day, and once they've established a population fed by yarrow's constant bloom, they'll patrol your entire garden bed, not just the yarrow itself. To use this effectively, don't tuck yarrow into a far corner. Interplant it throughout vegetable beds and flower borders, ideally within a few feet of aphid-prone plants, so the beneficial insects it attracts have a short commute to their next meal. Yarrow tolerates poor soil, needs full sun, and is remarkably drought-tolerant once established, thriving in zones 3 through 9, with almost no maintenance beyond an occasional trim to prevent legginess. The overlooked bonus here reaches back centuries. Yarrow has a long folk history as a wound-healing herb, and while you shouldn't rely on it for anything medical without proper guidance, it's a striking example of how a single plant can carry both ecological and historical value. It also draws butterflies in respectable numbers, adding movement and color to a bed that's quietly doing serious pest management work in the background. It's worth noting that this predator recruitment strategy takes patience, in a way that direct repellents don't. You won't see results in a week. Beneficial insect populations build gradually over a full growing season, sometimes longer, as they discover the food source and settle in nearby. Gardeners who rip out their yarrow after one unimpressive month are giving up right before it starts paying off. Think of it less like a pesticide and more like slowly hiring a permanent pest control crew that works for nectar instead of a paycheck. So we've covered scent maskers, moth deterrents, and now a predator recruitment strategy. But some of the oldest pest control plants in gardening history work through neither of those methods. They work through something closer to outright deterrence, and one of them comes with a genuine word of caution. Number 5. Tansy. Tansy, Tanacetum vulgare, has been planted near doorways and kitchen gardens for centuries, historically used to keep ants out of homes, and to deter Colorado potato beetles from decimating potato crops. It's one of the oldest pest management perennials in Western gardening tradition, and it still works, with a caveat we need to address honestly. Tansy contains thujone and several other terpene compounds that many insects find genuinely repellent, and there's long-standing traditional use supporting its effect on ants, flies, and certain beetles. The scientific evidence here leans more anecdotal and historical than rigorously tested in controlled modern trials, so treat tansy as a time-tested tool rather than a lab-proven one. That said, gardeners have relied on it for this exact purpose since medieval times, and that track record counts for something. Here's the caution part. Tansy is toxic if ingested in significant quantities, for both humans and pets, due to that same thujone content. Keep it away from areas where pets graze or children play, and never assume it's safe to eat despite its long history in traditional medicine. It's also aggressive underground, spreading through rhizomes fast enough that several regions now classify it as invasive. Contain it in a large pot or install a physical root barrier if you're planting it directly in a bed, because letting tansy roam free is a decision you'll regret within 2 seasons. Used responsibly. Plant tansy near entryways, sheds, or compost areas where ants tend to congregate, keeping it contained and away from edible crops it might crowd out. It handles zones 3 through 7, tolerates poor soil without complaint, and needs very little water once established. The overlooked benefit is its usefulness as a cut and dried flower. Those clusters of small, button-like yellow blooms hold their color remarkably well when dried, making tansy a favorite in dried arrangements for over a century. It was even historically used in embalming practices for its preservative qualities. A strange bit of trivia, but a real one. Quick comment prompt for you. Has a plant ever gotten away from you and turned invasive in your yard? You're definitely not alone. If so, tell me what happened. Now let's move to a plant with an even older reputation. One the Romans specifically planted to protect their gardens, and one that comes with its own very specific handling warning. Plant 6, rue. Rue, Ruta graveolens, shows up in Roman agricultural writing, medieval herbals, and Renaissance garden plans, consistently recommended as protection against beetles. That kind of staying power across 2,000 years of gardening advice is worth paying attention to, even before we get into the chemistry behind it. The common mistake here is assuming any bitter, strong-smelling plant works the same way against every pest. Rue's protection is more targeted than that. It contains alkaloids and volatile oils that are specifically unpalatable to Japanese beetles and flea beetles, 2 pests that cause serious damage to roses, grapes, and raspberries. Rather than repelling through smell alone, rue seems to work partly through taste deterrence. Insects that take an exploratory bite tend not to come back for a second one. Here's the important safety note, and it's a real one, not just a formality. Rue's sap can cause phytophotodermatitis, a skin reaction triggered when the plant's compounds combine with sunlight exposure, resulting in painful blistering similar to a severe sunburn. Always wear gloves and long sleeves when pruning or handling rue, especially on hot, sunny days. It's a fantastic pest deterrent, but it demands respect while you're working with it. Practically speaking, plant rue near roses, grapevines, and raspberry canes, the plants most vulnerable to Japanese beetle damage, but keep it away from high-traffic areas like path edges where you or kids might brush against it accidentally. Rue prefers full sun, tolerates poor and even rocky soil, and grows as a small, shrubby perennial reaching about 2 to 3 feet. Hardy in zones 4 through 9. The overlooked benefit is a genuinely lovely one. Rue is a host plant for swallowtail butterfly caterpillars, meaning it doesn't just deter pests, it actively supports a pollinator species through its entire larval stage. Its blue-green, finely divided foliage also adds striking texture and color contrast to a garden bed, entirely separate from its pest control function. There's an old bit of garden folklore worth mentioning here too. Rue was traditionally called the herb of grace in parts of Europe and was often planted near garden gates, partly for its symbolic meaning and partly because gardeners noticed beetle damage dropped off near entry points where it grew thickest. Whether that was the plant itself or simply the fact that gates got more foot traffic and disturbance, nobody can say for certain, but the placement habit stuck around for a reason. We've covered chives, lavender, catmint, yarrow, tansy, and rue. Our final 2 plants bring us back to 2 very different corners of the plant world. One enormous and showy, one silvery and almost ghost-like, and together they round out a strategy that covers nearly every angle. Number 7. Ornamental alliums. You've probably seen ornamental alliums in garden photos, without realizing what they were. Those tall stems topped with perfect purple spheres, sometimes the size of a softball, that look almost too geometric to be real. Most gardeners plant them purely for the visual drama. What they don't realize is that these giant ornamental onions carry the same defensive chemistry as the edible alliums we started with, just scaled up. The assumption people make is that only edible alliums, garlic, onions, chives, have any pest or wildlife deterrent effect, since those are the ones we associate with cooking and flavor. But ornamental alliums contain the same sulfur-based compounds, allyl sulfides, throughout their bulbs and foliage. Deer and rabbits, which rely heavily on smell to identify safe food, tend to avoid alliums specifically because of these compounds. And while the deterrent effect against insects is generally milder than against browsing mammals, interspersing alliums among vulnerable plants like tulips and roses has shown some benefit in reducing aphid presence too. For best results, plant clusters of ornamental allium bulbs directly among plants that deer, rabbits, or aphids frequently target, rather than isolating them in a separate ornamental bed. Fall is the right time to plant the bulbs, several inches deep in well-drained soil, and they need full sun to perform their best. Most varieties handle zones 3 through 9 comfortably. The overlooked bonus here is architectural. Even after the purple blooms fade, the seed heads dry in place and hold their striking spherical shape for weeks, sometimes turning silvery gray and adding structural interest to the garden well into autumn. They're also a strong pollinator draw while blooming, feeding bees during a period when many other flowers have finished for the season. One practical note on timing: alliums bloom relatively early, often before many of your vegetables are fully established, which means their deterrent presence is already active by the time young, tender seedlings become an attractive target. Planting them the previous fall rather than waiting until spring gives you that head start, so the bulbs are already rooted and ready to grow the moment temperatures warm up. Now for our final plant, and it's the one that requires the most thoughtful placement of anything on this list, because used wrong, it can actually work against you. Plant 8. Wormwood. Wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, is probably best known as the plant behind absinthe, but long before it was famous for that, it had a quieter reputation as a moth repellent, traditionally dried and placed in linen closets and storage chests, the way we'd use cedar or mothballs today. The common misconception is that silvery, fuzzy-leaved plants like wormwood are purely ornamental, chosen for their soft, muted color in a garden design and nothing more. In reality, that silvery coating is partly made of fine hairs that reduce water loss, and the plant's tissue is loaded with bitter compounds, including absinthin and thujone, that make it genuinely unpalatable to a wide range of chewing insects, along with deer. Here's where things get interesting though, because wormwood has a property most of the plants on this list don't share. It's allelopathic, meaning it releases chemical compounds into the surrounding soil that can actually inhibit the growth of nearby plants, particularly vegetables and other tender perennials. Plant it directly among your tomatoes or beans, and instead of protecting them, you might stunt them. That's a real risk, not a minor caveat. The smart way to use wormwood is as a standalone border or hedge along the outer perimeter of your garden, functioning as a barrier pests have to cross before reaching your vulnerable plants, rather than mixing it directly into planting beds. Give it several feet of buffer from anything you actually want to thrive. It handles full sun, thrives in poor, dry soil where richer plants would struggle, and is hardy in zones 4 through 9, with essentially no watering needed once roots are established. The overlooked advantage is its usefulness in garden design, specifically because of that silver-gray foliage. It creates striking visual contrast against green foliage and colorful blooms, and its extreme drought tolerance makes it a natural fit for xeriscaping or low-water garden sections, all while quietly doing perimeter pest control work most visitors would never notice. So here's how these 8 plants actually work together, because none of them are meant to operate alone. Think of your garden defense in 3 layers. The outer layer is your barrier zone. Plants like wormwood, tansy, and rue positioned along the perimeter or near entry points, creating a chemical boundary that pests have to push through before reaching anything valuable. With rue and tansy also handling specific beetle and ant problems near structures. The middle layer is your insectary zone, yarrow and catmint scattered through your beds, constantly recruiting ladybugs, lacewings, and parasitic wasps to patrol for you around the clock. And the inner layer is your interplanting zone, garlic chives, lavender, and ornamental alliums tucked directly among your most vulnerable plants, roses, brassicas, tomatoes, disrupting the exact scent signals pests use to find their targets in the first place. No single plant on this list is a silver bullet, And if you plant one lavender bush and expect your whole garden to be pest-free, you'll be disappointed. But layer several of these together, barrier, insectary, and interplanting, and you're not fighting pests with a single weapon anymore. You're building a self-sustaining system that gets stronger every year as these perennials mature and spread, doing more work for less effort with each passing season. This is also why spraying and planting aren't actually competing strategies. They just operate on different timelines. A spray handles this week's emergency. These perennials handle next year's baseline. The gardeners who stop fighting the same battle every single June are usually the ones who accepted that pest control isn't a single decisive action, it's an environment you build once and then let mature. Give a barrier hedge of wormwood 2 years and it behaves completely differently than it does in its first nervous, half-established season. Give a yarrow patch 2 full years and the predatory insect population it supports will be doing measurable work you can actually see. Fewer aphid colonies, fewer skeletonized leaves, less time spent scouting for damage every morning. If this approach is new to you, try starting small. Pick one plant from each layer, get them established this season, and expand from there once you see how they perform in your specific conditions. Every garden is a little different, and the plants that thrive fastest for you might surprise you. If you found this useful, subscribe for more evidence-based gardening strategies that go beyond the surface-level tips you've probably already heard 100 times. See you in the next video.